Okay, I'm Rafael Alunan. I'm from Negros. And I first met President Ramos in 1986 during the February Revolution. He was inside Krame, I was outside Krame. But at some point, we met. And from then on, I was an avid follower of the president. That was in 1986. And I have a lot of stories to tell you about those fateful days in February. But I got to join him in government in 1989 when I was asked, together with then Secretary Peter Garucho, to join the Department of Tourism. So my entry point in government was as Undersecretary of Tourism, in charge of regional offices and tourism services. 6 months later, I had the opportunity to work again with President Ramos when we experienced the December 1989 coup. During the first 3 days, I was in Camp Crame with members of the Special Action Force, and we were helping out then Secretary Ramos and General De Villa, who were on the other side in Camp Aguinaldo. A few days later, when the siege of both camps ended, after the rebels surrendered, we had to face a new threat, and this was the takeover by the 1st Philippine Scout Rangers of the Makati Business District. And at that time, after I returned from Camp Crame to the Department of Tourism, the general manager of Manila Garden, now Dusit, I remember him as, his name was Mr. Tsuruoka, married to a Filipina. The day I got back to the Department of Tourism, I was asked to go directly to the office of the department secretary, Secretary Garucho. And there I saw Mr. Tsuruoka on his knees, pleading for the Department of Tourism to do something about, he said, save my hotel. And so I was wondering what the hell he was referring to. So I asked him, I said, what is this all about? And he said, well, you know, the Rangers have taken over the Makati Business District. They're in my hotel, and they're occupying other buildings and Intercon Hotel as well. And the government forces are prepared to demolish the hotels just to flush out the rebels. No, he says, can you imagine what that will do to Philippine tourism if the news is broadcasted worldwide with pictures that the hotels are being bombed? So he says, please save my hotel and please save Philippine tourism. So it fell upon me I was designated to figure out a way on how to negotiate with the rebels and see how we could get the trapped civilians, a lot of them were tourists, out of the Makati Business District. And so that got the ball rolling. We coordinated with the Department of National Defense and the AFP and with Malacanang. And we said, we'll work out a scheme where we'll try to reach out to the rebels. And if they respond, then we're going to ask them to talk to us so we could together effect the safe release of the hostages from the battle area. Okay. And I was given the go signal. I was dealing then with Secretary Ramos, General De Villa, General Florendo, General Ermita. Well, to make a long story short, Toby, 4 or 5 hours after we got to talk to Mr. Tsuruoka, we thought of taping an announcement over the radio, to be aired over the radio, that reached out to the rebels. And the whole idea was for them to get in touch with us. And we asked our friends in the media to keep on playing this over and over again. And that caught the ears of the rebels. The whole night, they called me, asking without identifying themselves, and asking what I wanted out of them. So I told them, I just want to talk to you and your officers to try to get the hostages out of harm's way. By 9 o'clock the next morning, 9 hours after we started broadcasting, I got connected through a radio station that called me up, which the rebels were actually using. This was DZAM.
Yes.
I remember very well because it was a unique name. The station manager was Lambert Pabellon. And he says, Mr. Undersecretary, I have here on the line Major Abraham Puruganan. And so we got to talk with Major Puruganan, and basically it lasted only a few minutes. I went straight to the point, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about effecting the release of the hostages. He says, oh, sir, they're not hostages. They just happen to be caught in the crossfire. So I said, well, then, will you agree with me that both sides can give them safe passage out of the battle zone? Oh, yes, sir. We will definitely cooperate with you, but can we have a ceasefire? So I promised to work out a ceasefire. By 4 o'clock, the ceasefire was in effect.
The discussions were all over telephone conversations.
Yes, telephone and radio.
Yes.
And the only time I got to see them was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's actually, I remember vividly the video from that particular a Undersecretary of Tourism coming from out of nowhere. You know? And now it makes pretty good sense why it was you, because you were people from the hotel and recreation and lifestyle industry, you know, connected with the person, the government official in charge of that particular industry, and made the plea to you to help them out. No?
Well, I'm glad you raised that, Toby. So, which gives me the opportunity to walk backwards, no, and go back again to 1986,
All right.
which I failed to mention. So I might as well mention this now
Go ahead.
to see the connection.
Yes, please.
After the February '86 People Power Revolution, good friend of mine who has passed away, a very good friend of mine from AIM, Professor Mayo Lopez, and I were representatives of British firms in the security field.
All right.
And at that time, we felt that since there was a new government in place and the institutions had to be rebuilt, especially our security institutions, it was important for us to bring to the table and present to them foreign equipment and foreign services that could help them rebuild. One of the companies that we represented was a company by the name of KAS, which was founded by the founder of the Special Air Service, SAS, David Sterling, who was still alive then. And the idea was to have the Special Air Service retrain the Presidential Security Group, the Special Action Force, which was founded by President Ramos. It was then headed by the time we got to meet him, it was headed by Major Sonny Razon. The immediate past commander was Ray Velasco. And it was during that period that we really got to talk to President Ramos and General De Villa and the Special Action Force community. So much so that in 1987, we were helping in the background during there was a major coup attempt in 1987, so we were involved there. So when we got to 1989, it was easy for me to connect because of the past relationship. All right, so one thing led to the other when we discussed matters with the Scout Rangers. Within an hour or two, 9 out of 10 demands, which were non-military in nature, were quickly agreed upon. Okay, the only thing that was snagged was a military demand. So I said, look, that's beyond me. I have to go back and bring back your demand to the military, and they'll have to work it out with you. That's when they brought in General Enrile, Arturo Enrile. And by 3 o'clock that morning, it was all over. They had come to terms, and General Enrile called me at home to say, get ready with your buses. I had a working relationship with the OTC then. They provided over 100 buses to shuttle the trapped tourists and civilians from the Makati Business District to the duty-free shops where the desks of the different embassies were laid out to process for processing. And so by 11 o'clock the next day, everything was over, terminated. And it took, I guess, less than 24 hours from the time we got to talk to the time we settled everything.
Except for one thing, the physical presence of the rebel soldiers still within the business district, right?
Well, after the civilians were released, part of the agreement with General Enrile was for them to walk back to their barracks with their firearms. Yeah, and then upon entry to the camp, the firearms would be taken from them, and all of them were brought to the stockade. Yeah,
They were all they marched back.
They marched back, yeah.
To the Fort Bonifacio.
To Fort Bonifacio, that's
area, right?
which was where their encampment was.
Where the army rangers were stockaded at.
So that was my very first experience, direct experience dealing with the military as a member of government.
With FVR?
With FVR as Secretary of...
he was Secretary of Defense
of
then,
Defense, right? Yes. And then a year later, Secretary Garucho was transferred to the DTI. And so I was appointed Secretary of Tourism.
Under the Cory cabinet.
Under the Cory cabinet. So for about a year, a little over a year, Secretary Ramos and I were colleagues in the cabinet of Cory Aquino. Yes.
All right. Tell me first, give me first impressions. So again, I'm coming back to about 86 when I guess when you first met him. Was that the first time you met him?
I met him, in 1986 in Camp Crame.
Right.
And I saw him as a flamboyant, very self-confident, and very decisive fellow. You know, somebody who you could trust. And because of the success, the miracle that transpired after 4 days, I mean, he loomed larger than life. You know, every time he passed by, I'd say, "Wow, my golly, you're a giant of a man." You know, he pulled the impossible, and so here we are under a new regime.
Well, he and supposedly then Minister Enrile, no?
Yes.
But you were actually on different.
I was in the private sector at the time.
Correct. They were part of the military defense establishment that had very radically broken away from the Marcos government.
Yeah.
And you were outside as. Could I say that we could count you there as part of the citizens who just came out and why did you go out there? I mean, how did you find yourself there outside at EDSA?
I guess it began with the murder of Ninoy Aquino in 1983. And we felt that that was really an unjust act. A defenseless man just arrived and then in the custody of military officials and killed right there, no? So obviously it was a rub out. And we thought that that's really a crime, and so we were so upset. It was his death caused what you call spontaneous combustion. I mean, everybody just stood up and said, "Hindi puede." So and there were rallies every day, protesting that. No, so that led to eventually to the snap elections, and during that period, I was part of a group called Manindigan,
All right.
and Manindigan was led by Jimmy Ompin,
Yes.
which had ties with Ram.
Okay.
Right. So we had inside information about plans, etc. And so it didn't come as a surprise. February did not come as a surprise. Only the date when it actually happened. No?
Right.
Nobody really knew, but that was triggered by certain events
Yes.
that could not be foreseen. Yeah. Well, the rest is history. Yeah.
During that time, were you able to interact already with the FBR, or
No.
was it still just
No,
really?
I interacted with him right after February 25.
Oh, okay.
Right after. But I was interacting with the Special Action Force outside Camp Crame.
All right.
Yeah, civilians offering their assistance to the Special Action Force. Yeah.
Okay. So, fast forward 1989, you started, you were already in the Cory government, undersecretary. You started working with FVR, and he was then secretary of the
Department of National
Department
Defense.
of National Defense. A few months later, you get promoted as a tourism secretary.
Yes. And we got to work again on various occasions, especially in the area of humanitarian assistance. My most vivid memory of our interaction was during the Baguio earthquake.
1990.
Yes, again,
July.
I had to mobilize my people to rescue tourists who were trapped in Baguio,
All right.
and for us to send relief goods to those who were working there. And La Union, the airport in La Union, was our base of operations. President Ramos, then the secretary, was in charge of the operations. So we interacted with him. That was a month-long exercise of bringing goods there by air.
Yes,
Because-
airlifted, no?
Airlifted, because everything was impassable, no, by land.
What was it like working with him now as an equal at cabinet level?
Easy. He didn't have any airs. But at the same time, you knew that he was the type of guy that was strict, got things done. He was very, very thorough, always doing his homework. He was known to be a fellow that would act only when he had more or less complete information, right? Completed staff work is CSW.
Classic,
Yeah.
which is now a classic SOP for
That's
government
right.
work, no?
That's right. And he's the type of guy that works very well under pressure. No, kasi special forces eh. Ang training niyan whether you're sick or you lack sleep or you're feeling weak or debilitated, you still have to think straight. And you still have to act decisively. No? That's the kind of guy he was.
So you were colleagues in that particular administration, but let me get to some other facet of your relationship. You were also a member of Lakas, yes?
I joined Lakas only in just before 1992.
Just before 19.
Actually, it was Lakas Tao.
Correct.
Yeah, because I recall I was in in the West Coast.
Okay.
When I received a call from Manila saying that President Ramos, or Secretary Ramos, had lost out to Ramon Mitra, Speaker Mitra,
For the LDP.
for the, yes, to be the official candidate of the LDP in the presidential elections of 1992.
He lost out on the party primary.
That's correct. And I received a call, and I was being asked my opinion as to what to do. And the reason why I was called, I was asked my opinion, was because when I was still in the cabinet, I would send him small notes while we're having cabinet meetings, no? Small notes, basically saying, "Do you hear the bugles of history calling?"
Wow.
You know, and every time he'd see that, he'd look at me and give me his, he'd raise his eyebrows, and so that's how we communicated.
What exactly did you mean by, what exactly was your intent when you would send those notes?
Are you going to run for president?
Okay.
Yeah, basically that. Because he was the hero in 1986. He was a man of destiny.
All right.
He brought the country back to an era of democracy and freedom. And so I felt that,
He was defender.
well, he brought it back, and then later on defended, by his count 9 times.
Yeah. All right.
By his count 9 times. So I figured that, given that performance, right, achievement, that the presidency was his, to be had, no, after Cory. In fact, I talked to President Cory about it.
All right.
I said, "Ma'am, if there's
When was that?
Oh, this was in 91.
91.
Yeah, I said, "Ma'am, if there's anybody who should take your place, it's President Ramos." And so I gave her all the reasons for that. And I'm glad that she did decide on President
Eventually.
Ramos, yes. Because she was really leaning towards Speaker Mitra,
Yes.
because he was very popular.
Yes.
He was a very good politician. He had the charisma. And President Ramos, actually being a stern military man, was totally non-traditional.
Perceived as stiff, maybe?
Very
or-
stiff.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the people wanted a non-traditional politician. It was the right moment. And so President Cory instinctively chose him.
When did that idea take shape with you? When was that born?
Oh, 91. 91 pa. The time when I was sending him the notes,
All right.
will you answer the call of history?
And were you already with Lakas, or were you
No,
were you
Lakas was-
affiliated with any party then?
Not at all. Not at all.
No.
Lakas was formed after he lost the nomination.
Yes. Yes.
That's when I joined.
Oh. All right. All right.
And then after that, President Cory asked me to serve as his spokesman for the campaign.
Oh yes. Yes.
So that's what I did. After serving as spokesman for the bases, I served as spokesman for President Ramos.
It's interesting sharing there. Take me through, okay, LDP presidential hopeful Eddie Ramos, ex-Defense Secretary, failed to get the party nomination. What was it like? You were going against what was supposed to be a
Machinery.
very formidable machinery
Correct.
of the LDP. That was the party at that time, right?
That's correct. We were short of money,
Yes.
so we compensated for that by just working very hard. President Ramos had a back-breaking campaign, flying, taking the land route when no planes were available. It was really back-breaking work, but it had to be done. And considering he was a special forces guy, and special forces really go through all kinds of difficulties, no? So he took it well. He did.
What kind of resources did he put to bear, for example?
Well, he had a team that was scrambling every day, scrambling for money, just to keep the wheels moving, no? But we also had some political capital, because, of course, what he accomplished during the time of President Cory in 1986 earned him tremendous political capital. So, in media especially. So, a lot of people were helping him out.
What was his approach? I mean, from square one, with X amount of resources and perceivably very minimal as compared to the war chest of the LDP at that time. How did you see any of the traits for the guy is known as a consensus builder? Did you see that already at that time?
Yes, he was. And as a matter of fact, it's not that he came from zero, no? Versus Speaker Mitra or Dandi Cojuangco or Miriam Santiago or Imelda Marcos, who already had, political credentials. He too had political credentials. After all, he headed the Philippine Constabulary. And the Philippine Constabulary naturally dealt with local officials. Right? And he held that post for a long, long time. And then as he rose up the ranks, the more sectors and institutions and people he engaged as Chief of Staff, as Secretary of National Defense. So, and then, of course, the fact that he was a second cousin of President Marcos, he had a lot of political networks as well to touch base with. So it's not that he was coming from zero. What he had to do was convince them that he was the better choice. And that took a hope and a prayer, actually, because, politicians normally give their word ahead of time. And if you're delayed, if you're behind in asking, I mean, even if they like you more, chances are you're not going to get it. Or at the very best, they'll give you part of their command votes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's what he did. I remember I was with Cardinal Sin
All right.
in the West Coast when I received the call,
All right.
and he was asking me before the nomination snafu, no? He said, "Why are you supporting President Ramos?" So I said, "Well, because I see him as a decisive fellow. He's a non-traditional politician. He has a vision for the country. And I think he's the type of guy that can hold the nation together." No? I see, he says, "So I see, that's very interesting. First time I hear somebody give that side of President Ramos, of Secretary Ramos." I said, that doesn't mean that the others don't have it, but I personally think that, President Ramos stuck his neck out in February. And during the next 6 years, he lay his life on the line and his, I suppose, his reputation on the line. And that saved the day for the Republic. And so he deserves that shot, and he deserves the position.
Tell me how he got the endorsement.
Of Cory?
Yes.
I suppose Cory...
Were you around? Were you around when?
No, I wasn't around. But I suppose...
But you had already left the cabinet at that time, no? You were already into...
But even before I left the cabinet, there were many who were informing her or sending feelers to her that what the country needs is a non-traditional president. And Eddie Ramos's name kept on cropping up, no? But that's from those who didn't come from political dynasties or from the political clans. The non-LDP guys, or the sectoral people, like in our case, the business community, etc. But I would imagine that not aside from the inputs coming from various quarters, I think President Cory reflected on it, prayed on it a lot, and came to the conclusion that President Ramos would be the better man to lead as president.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you with FVR when news of that come out? Where were you when that news of that endorsement came out?
I was still in the cabinet.
Oh, okay.
That was, I think, January.
Okay.
And then right after she made that decision, she said, "You better prepare already to serve as spokesperson for President Ramos and be in the campaign." So shortly in February, I quit
Yes.
and joined the campaign.
Yes. So you were so basically next to the candidate, you were the other face, no? Of the Ramos candidacy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, that's terrific then. But it wasn't exactly a smooth ride, wasn't it? The campaign.
The campaign was not a smooth ride at
Not
all.
at all, because if I remember, so you had Danding, you had Miriam,
Actually, Toby,
Imelda.
the very first day that I joined as spokesperson,
All right.
the presidential candidate Eddie Ramos went missing. He went abroad.
I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And people were badgering me.
Yeah.
No, I said, "Where is President Ramos? You're the spokesperson. You should know." I said, "No, honestly," I said, "this is my first day. I really don't know. I have to find out and let you know."
Yeah, I was part of that chorus too.
Yeah. I really didn't know. It was only maybe a few weeks later that I found out that he was with Speaker de Venecia. And they went abroad to talk to
CSD, Christian Social Democrats of Europe, right?
Christian Democrats was one, and the other was Muammar Gaddafi.
Oh.
Because they were already ironing out the peace talks with the MNLF. And Nur Miswari was in Tripoli. So they were working things out.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Smooth ride it was not. Because if I remember also, it was maybe about 2 or 3 weeks before D-Day, election day, that the numbers started going.
It was in April.
Right.
It was in April, late April,
Correct.
that the situation turned around in his favor.
Right. That's when the numbers started moving up. And that was the last 3 weeks,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because we had the election first week of.
I think what helped him then was the fact that you know the famous Batasan raid,
Okay.
where
Those election paraphernalia.
the election posters were being printed, which was against the rules, no? So of course it sunk Speaker Mitra, and that brought up I suppose the political stock of the numbers, no, for President Ramos. At that time, we were looking at him and Danding Cojuangco and Imelda Marcos as the main threats. It was only after Wonching Mitra fell away that we realized that the strongest contender to the presidency was Miriam.
Was Miriam.
That's correct.
The People's Reform Party.
That's right.
Of Miriam.
And we were scared to death that at some point in the last, let's say, few weeks, that Mr. Cojuangco and former First Lady Imelda Marcos would team up.
Might join.
Yes.
Correct.
Because in the end, when we saw the results, no, if you add their votes, either one of them would have won. It was a formidable team had they decided to bury the hatchet, no. But then God works in mysterious ways.
As you have it there, candidate Ramos won, but not a majority.
He won by the skin of his teeth.
It was a plurality.
It was a plurality and just by a small margin over
24%
Miriam.
or thereabouts.
Over Miriam,
yeah, yeah. And then a few percentage points away was Miriam, right?
That's correct.
Right.
And that's, I remember, because she lost by that slim margin, she was blaming President Ramos and everybody else who worked for him, including me, for having cheated her of the elections. I remember on the first day of the counting, and it was a slip up on my part. I wasn't thinking. It was an early count. It was a precinct somewhere in Ilocos, where President Ramos had 10 votes, and let's say Miriam had 3 votes. And then all of a sudden, she appears before the camera and says, "I'm being cheated. I'm being cheated." And I happened to be watching that in the headquarters, and there were members of media there. So right away, they looked at me and said, "Well, a spokesperson, what can you say about that?" And my eyes was transfixed, no, because I couldn't believe my ears that she was trending, no. She was hoping that what she would say would trend, no. I said, "Well, it's too early for her to crack up."
Oh yeah, that kind
and oh boy, I got castigated by a lot of people.
Yeah, and that was actually what media then carried. It's too early for her to
Crack up, yeah.
crack up. Yeah.
And I wanted to apologize to her, but boy, if looks could kill,
Yeah. There'd be a lot of you. How did Ramos take to that protest? Miriam eventually filed an electoral protest before the Presidential Electoral Tribunal. No?
oh, he just let his people handle it, lawyers and whoever. But I don't think it ever led to a court case or anything like that. No? It was Comelec who decided, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was hands off.
Oh, okay. Well, it was hands off, but what I'm asking is, did it bother him that,
Of course, it bothered him.
well, given that it was a
Sure,
pretty slim lead, no, that
definitely,
he had there?
definitely. Of course, it was bothering everybody. We were hoping nothing serious would turn up,
Yeah.
no, but nothing did. I remember 1 month after the end of the counting. This was early June.
Right.
When we were in the car. I was in front, and the President-elect, Secretary Ramos was behind. And my radio crackled. It was future Speaker Joe De Venecia.
Oh.
He said, "Raffy, this is Joe. I'm calling from the Batasan.
All right.
Where is Eddie?" I said, right here in the car, right behind. Please tell him that congratulations, Mr. President-elect.
All right.
Yun. So I told him about that. I gave him the radio, so they spoke. And he said, "Hey guys, congratulations to all. I'm now the President-elect. Back to work." That was Eddie Ramos.
Wow. Okay. So take in the announcement and I remember that was early morning, wasn't it?
Evening.
Yes,
We
right.
were called in the evening by Joe.
Yes, and then did you did FVR and the campaign team have to come back to Batasan for
No, we didn't go to
proclamation
Batasan. That day, I
of
think
the
we
winner?
went back to the headquarters,
all right.
to our headquarters in Makati,
Uh-huh.
along Pasay Road.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's where we went.
Okay. 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 That was it.
Yeah.
Back to work.
Yeah, congratulations, guys. Thank you all. Back to work.
So next step. What was it like? I mean, well, can you be
Euphoric.
Okay.
It was euphoric.
Uh-huh.
I
Start
you
preparing
know that,
for, di ba? Start
yeah.
preparing for the next 6 years.
actually, the transition team was holding office in DBP. We held office there.
Okay.
Right after that announcement, we went now to DBP, and for the next 3 weeks, we met with everybody, including Joseph Estrada.
Right.
And I recall a meeting that President Ramos called that involved Joan Monte, Renato de Villa, and myself, where he said, I'm going to give our Vice President-elect a cabinet position.
Okay.
And we said, oh, what cabinet position would that be, sir? And he said, well, because he loves to fight crime, I'll give him the position of chairman of an anti-crime commission that I'll create. And we said, oh, okay. And he said, he got more votes than me, so it's very important that we work together rather than working against each other. So we said that's a fine idea, and we're all for it. And shortly after he offered it, Vice President Estrada just came back from overseas,
Yes.
went directly to the office of President-elect Ramos, where the offer was made. And he graciously said, thank you, Mr. President-elect, I'll think about it. 5 days before the oath-taking, he had not come back to President Ramos. So President Ramos asked me to call him. So I asked Erap, I said, sir, are you accepting the offer of President Ramos? He's been waiting, and your inauguration is 5 days away. And that's where I first encountered his humor.
All right.
Sabi niya, Raffy, pakisabi mo na lang kay President-elect Ramos na pinag-isipan ko pa. Okay, sabi ko, okay, but bakit? Bakit pa? Tagal-tagal na. Kasi crime does not pay. So nung binanggit ko yan kay President Ramos, nakuha niya agad. Sabi niya, he's asking for a budget.
All right.
So the rest is history. He accepted the position. And he became my vice chairman. He became my chairman of the Anti-Crime Commission.
One of our cameramen at PTV actually was there, and he was the one who documented it when the raid was done.
We were all held hostage. All of us. Eventually, after we entered and we discovered the anomaly, we were all of us were held hostage. So the media started saying, hey, we're also we're held hostage here. That sank Monching, who was campaigning in Pangasinan.
Yeah.
When they told him about it, right away, the feedback we got was that he said, oh, it's all over. He knew that it was.
He knew that.
Yeah, he knew that. Kasi the one who entered the Batasan to check it out was Heidi Yorak.
Who was then
Comelec.
chair.
No, it was
no, right.
it was Christian Monsod. Christian Monsod. I called Christian. I said, Christian, I was just talking to President Cory. We have the evidence here, but she says, don't move, don't get out of that place until Chairman Monsod gets there. She says, Raffy, I'm playing golf and I'm here in Laguna. I won't be able to make it there on time. I'm sending Heidi Orak. I said, sure. Pagpasok ni Heidi, in about 15 minutes, she already knew that the people she was talking to were lying through their teeth.
Yes.
Because they were giving different stories.
Yes.
Patay.
Wow. Okay. So, let me bring it back to what eventually would turn out to be the discussions with Vice President-elect Erap eventually turned out into the creation of the Presidential Anti-Crime Commission.
Commission,
right?
yes.
Task Force Habagat and Task Force Aguila. No? Right. Okay, let's get into 6 years. Well, refresh my memory, Secretary. You were around the entire stretch, were you? Or no?
I
You
left
were.
in 96.
All right.
I left in 96.
Okay.
Basically because my wife wanted me to come back. She had a depression.
Okay.
She never understood the ways of government, the ways of politics, and she was saying, "Why are they attacking you when you're just doing what's good for the country? And you're not stealing. You're one of the good guys. But why are you being attacked?" I said, "Well, that's because that's the nature of politics."
Yes.
And I'm occupying a political position. But all of that is acoustic. It's all tactics, but there's really nothing personal or real or substantive there. No? But she lived a sheltered life and never understood the ways of politics, so it got her depressed.
For you, it was par for the course.
It was par for the course. I understood it completely. So I told President Ramos 3 times I resigned. When the last time I resigned, he said, "Oh, talagang you mean it?" I said, "Sir, of course I mean it. It's my wife that's involved, and I have to go back."
But I'm jumping. I'm going ahead of the cart here. Why DILG?
Because that was the job he offered me. And probably it was because of my relationship with the Special Action Force.
All right.
And at that time, the year before that, I was inducted into the Army by him, through him, no?
Yeah.
And I underwent training with the Special Forces,
All right.
which it was a unit where he served as the first commander.
Oh.
Okay. Special Action Force was a unit that he founded.
Yes. But that was PC
In 1983.
INP, right?
Yeah, in 1983,
In the
May 16.
constabulary, yeah, at that time. Okay. So now you're DILG secretary, but that wasn't exactly a smooth ride as well, Secretary.
It wasn't?
Let me run down a few of the challenges you had at the time. The early 90s is really marked by the emergence of the Abu Sayyaf. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The early 90s.
Well, I'll have to dichotomize, no? Because I occupied basically 2 departments. One was the National Police Commission,
Yeah.
of which the PNP was under,
Interior.
and then the local government side. We were both implementing new laws for the
Yes.
first time, the local government code
Yes.
and the PNP law. So we were the administration that had to implement it from scratch, no? So in the local government side, of course, there was a lot of adjusting to do. The same thing applied to the Philippine National Police, right? What we had to do early on, and this was a matter of common understanding that we had with President Ramos early on. We had to shake the tree and get people to fall in line, right? And the only way to do that was to really run after the scalawags. So in the case of the local governments, we were very proactive in suspending or bringing to court people that crossed the line, those who were involved in malfeasance or misfeasance. The same thing with the Philippine National Police. As a matter of fact, the first shock treatment that we gave was the early retirement of 67 generals and colonels.
Who were overextended, or
No, well, we early retired. They were retired early.
Oh.
But it wasn't given much publicity based on my orders, my instructions, because it was a very delicate matter, and it was something that had to be handled with care to avoid a bloody backlash, no? So what we did was we spoke to them President Ramos called for a conference. And he said, we're going to infuse the organization, especially the top echelon, with young blood, right? Which means that some of you will be retired early, right? Of course, the real score was that we'll get rid of all these scalawags, right? But we tried to soft pedal by using early retirement. And I promised them, I said, I'm not going to engage in trial by publicity. I'm not here for, to bring myself up. I'm just here to do a job, which is to clean house and to bring up young blood to run the organization. So in exchange for not engaging in trial by publicity, you will accept the decision once we make the announcement as to who will be retired early. And so they said yes. Now, to get that done, we created a 9-man committee, of which I chaired, and the other 8 were chosen by them. And President Ramos was brilliant. He says, guys, I'd like you to look at your role models in the Philippine National Police and in the Armed Forces, where you came from, because they will be the guys that will select those that will be retired early. So this should be men of very good reputation, of integrity, of probity. And so they did. And among the people they selected was Secretary De Villa, who served as my vice chair, General Alex Aguirre, who eventually became my undersecretary. There was General Jimmy Barbers, the uncle of Bobby Barbers, etc. No, so all of them. I remember General Levi Malto, who was in charge of LAGCOM of the Armed Forces. So after about 6 months of reviewing the records of 300 plus senior officers of the Philippine National Police, including face-to-face interviews, we decided on 67 generals and colonels. Eventually, after four years during my stint, we let go of 3,000 more. This followed the policy of reform of President Ramos, where we were out to reform the criminal justice system, starting with the police, to be followed by the Department of Justice, the prosecutors, and then the jails, and then with the help of the Supreme Court, cleaning up the courts. But we fell short of our target of getting rid of at least 20% of the force. 20% meaning the most inefficient and scalawags, those that really didn't deserve to wear the uniform. At that time, I had 100,000 policemen, so 20% was 20,000. So after 4 years,
1 out of 5.
we only got rid of 3,000, with 17,000 to go. And the reason for that was because when the PNP was divorced from the Armed Forces, the disciplinary mechanisms that the Armed Forces have to quickly discipline their men was lost, because now the Philippine National Police was subject to the civilian processes, which took longer to process and to reach final decisions. So that's what hindered our cleanup of the Philippine National Police.
It had to, it had to evolve on its own, no? That process of weeding out.
We had to follow due process.
Correct.
The military due process was no longer, excuse me, was no longer available to us. For as long as military justice is no longer available to the Philippine National Police, it will take them more time to clean house, unlike the military.
I like the way you've divided your role, no? The dichotomy there, both the interior and the local government side, and correctly so, because, yeah, you were creating new institutions, no? One was a new national police that was truly civilian in character and governed by civilian processes and totally under the supervision and jurisdiction of government. The other one actually was, this was about the time that that the local government code was also implemented, right?
That's correct. And there was a nexus there. Part of the PNP law required that the local chief executives chose their chiefs of police. So we had no choice but to deal with the local government officials with respect to which in the list deserved to be appointed as their chiefs of police. And there was always tension in that respect because they had ulterior motives. While in our case, we wanted to make sure that the chiefs of police remained independent.
Right.
And operationally, while they were under the control of the local chief executive, they had to be 100% administratively under our control.
Right.
In the past, when the political warlords were really on top, all the policemen serving under them served as their security guards, personal security guards. No? So we wanted to professionalize the police, and we didn't want any of that to happen. So there was a lot of tension and friction along those lines. And the worst part was that under the local government code, the ILG no longer had command and control over the local governments. They were now basically autonomous. And so what we had was the power of supervision and monitoring, etc. But that didn't stop us from filing cases against those people that violated existing laws, no? Like the Code of Conduct for public officials, Code of Ethics.
That was very challenging, actually. Now, I'm looking at the country in transition. No more coups, no more attempts to topple government. But there were just as much real challenges facing the administration of FVR.
Oh my golly, tremendous.
He was I already mentioned it earlier. He was a plurality vote winner. So, tell me about how he was able to galvanize or bring together local government officials, for example, who didn't support his candidacy.
Well, all of us were suffering from north to south with brownouts.
Oh, that one too. Yeah.
And it was affecting the national and local economies. So everybody was focused on how do we get, over the hump, no?
That was one of the most immediate.
That's right. So rallying around the president to solve the problem was, I guess, the call of the hour. And considering that President Estrada, who was a member of the opposition, was working very well with us, so that held the opposition at bay. And then, of course, Speaker de Venecia and his Rainbow Coalition in the House. That was a very effective approach in getting everybody on board. As you mentioned earlier, President Ramos was a consensus builder. So he engaged everybody, He got them to just focus on the problems that affected everybody else and set aside partisanship. So he was very, very effective there.
Secretary, I remember one particular facet of the first 6 months. Literally, every weekend was always an out-of-town. If you remember that, it was always an out-of-town adventure for the cabinet, for the president, FVR at that time. I was part of the circus as well, because I was covering, I was either covering those events, or I was the flown in announcer for some of the assemblies.
Yeah.
But what I do remember is that the man would say, we're done with the campaign, we're done with the election, can we move forward? Can we now focus on bringing the country together, number one, and moving forward together as a single unit?
Well, I'll tell you.
Give me your insight that particular period.
His leadership and his work ethic. He showed the way by example. No? And which brings me back to the campaign. When we said it was backbreaking, it was literally backbreaking. We would wake up 5 o'clock in the morning, and we would go over the news reports, and help prep him for any interviews before breakfast, because that's when the radio stations would call, etc. So we'd start the day at around 5, and we'd end the day at around midnight. That schedule spilled over to the time when we were in the cabinet already. We would wake up at 5 and we'd sleep at 12. And we were all burnt out cases. But because we had a lot of exposure to that kind of schedule and lifestyle, we got used to it in due time. So we said we were underpaid, we were overworked, and we were working 24/7. At some point, we said no, it wasn't 24/7, but 25/8. But the reason why we didn't mind was because we knew that we were coming from the depths of below sea level. No, we were known as the sick man of Asia.
Right.
The '89 coup, the Baguio earthquake, the Pinatubo eruption, and then a series of other events like, for example, the first Iraq War that impacted on tourism, travel, etc., the Ormoc landslide, etc. That brought us to our knees, and we became the sick man of Asia. Then we missed out on a crucial decision with respect to adding capacity to our power generating, to power, sa Napocor. And that ushered in a 2-year period of brownouts that spilled over into the first 2 years of President Ramos.
Yes.
Well, that galvanized everybody to just focus on the problem, right? Because otherwise, if we didn't solve it, there goes the economy, and there goes the country, and we'll have another period of instability, right? And, well, because of his leadership, his work ethic, and the fact that he had very good connections in the United States, very quickly, and being an engineer, he was able to resolve the problem, the energy problem, within a period of 2 years.
Yes.
But it was also those 2 years where Congress wasn't paying attention really to the fact that since the U.S. bases left, we lost our security cover, and that it was important for us to invest in our own national defense to fill in the void. Well, on account of the fact that we're so focused on solving the energy crisis and getting ourselves moving towards tiger cub status, we neglected to build up our national defense, such that by 1995, 3 years after President Ramos took over and 4 years after the Americans left, Mischief Reef was taken away from us by China.
We had the first incursions, actually.
Yes.
at first Chinese fishing vessels, and then eventually you see Coast Guard, right? And then research vessels.
We saw the prelude to that, the run up to that seizure, when our Navy would blow up markers that they would set up. But eventually, one fine day, they decided to just take it by force. And of course, their excuse was, "Oh, don't worry, we'll just put up shelters for our fishermen." And of course, nobody believed them. We knew that eventually that would lead into a military base, considering that we already knew about the notorious 9-dash line that they were peddling, and their insistence that they had indisputable sovereignty over the South China Sea. So now, what did President Ramos do when that happened?
Okay.
Well, as I recall, he did two things. Number one, he caused the passage of very quickly, and that was through Joe and the Rainbow Coalition, the passage of the first AFP Modernization Act. Right. The second was, he went shopping for second-hand equipment, South Korea, I think, Taiwan, and Thailand. They bought second-hand ships and planes, right? And some of those assets were parked in Palawan. Except that we were just reacting, right? It was a reactive thing. What was crucial was the AFP Modernization Act. And central to AFP modernization was the conversion of Fort Bonifacio into a mixed-use residential commercial development complex. Unfortunately, we were hit in 1997 by the Asian financial crisis, so that set back the modernization plan and the sale of Fort Bonifacio. And shortly after that, President Ramos left the scene, a new president took over, and AFP modernization was forgotten. At best, it was erratically or inconsistently applied. And the next time that we had to come to grips with AFP modernization was in 2012, when Scarborough was taken over by the Chinese. By that time, there was another Aquino in charge, who caused the passage of the second AFP Modernization Act, because the first one had only a 15-year lifespan, and it ended in 2010. Yeah.
Wow.
So President Ramos, I would say, in his 6 years, had his hands full. And yet, notwithstanding the fact that he was bookended by brownouts and by the Asian financial crisis, he managed during the interim, the period in between, to bring up the economy to Tiger Cub status. And he'll be remembered for that by the international community, because a lot of it had to do with domestic stability. Things were very predictable, no? And I suppose the quality of governance that he brought along was something that was appreciated by the global community and by the business community.
A few of the challenges, and let me just run down a few of these during that period. Kuratong Balileng,
Yeah.
remember? Kidnap for ransom groups. The RSG, if you still remember that,
Yes.
the Red Scorpion group.
Yeah.
And then, I already mentioned the rise of the Abu Sayyaf.
And Al Qaeda.
And
We had to deal with Al
that was
Qaeda.
the early 90s, right? How, given everything else happening, okay, what do you remember of how FVR, handled those situations,
Well, FVR,
those challenges?
he had very good men in the AFP and the PNP. And intelligence was central to the anti-crime and anti-terrorist operations. He had very good intelligence men in place in Malacanang, in the PNP, in the AFP. And it was because of good intelligence that we were able to thwart a lot of initiatives that we were able to nip in the bud, or if they slipped through our fingers, we were able to quickly deal with through arrests. No? There were many, many instances where we had to deal with Abdurrazak Janjalani, the founder of the Abu Sayyaf group, which was formerly called the Al-Harakat Al-Islamiyah. Basically kidnapping, the Spanish nuns, Father Blanco, a number of Zamboanga, wealthy Zamboanga businessmen, Father Nacorda, Cirilo Nacorda, yeah. And it was during this period that we had help from Libya, from Muammar Gaddafi, through his ambassador here, who became a very good friend of President Ramos and myself, Rajab Asaruk. It was through him that we were able to get to Janjalani, and with the help of the MNLF, to secure the safe release of the sausages. But the one that gave me real nightmares was the time when Pope John Paul, who was now Saint John Paul II, came to the Philippines, where he was a target of assassination by Al-Qaeda. Oh, my golly, it's going to probably take me half a day to tell you about the details, but I remember in November 1994, if I'm not mistaken, the PSG received a message from the Vatican that there was a team of terrorists that were out to assassinate Pope John Paul when he would visit Manila in January 1995. And so our intelligence community was on the alert. Sometime in the early days of December, something happened. A bomb blew up on board the Philippine Airlines flight to Japan.
Yes.
And at that time, we had no idea that this was related to the assassination of Pope John Paul. We were wondering who planted that bomb and why. I remember asking a team that we sent to Japan to work with the investigators there. I asked them, can you find out why the bomb was placed under that particular seat? Or was it just placed there at random? No? When they looked at the drawings of the aircraft, the fuel line passed under the seat, no?
Yes.
And it's a good thing that it turned out that the bomb was undercharged.
Okay.
So while it killed the passenger on that seat, it only dented the steel plating of the floor, no, leading to, and beneath that was the fuel line. So it was undercharged, and thank God for that, right? It was only later on when we found out, to some good sleuthing, that the fellow who planted the bomb was Ramzi Youssef.
There you are.
And Ramzi Youssef was the fellow who almost burnt down his apartment, his unit in the Josefa Apartments, where he and his three others, it was a four-man team, were cooking bombs that they would plant along the route of Pope John Paul. It was also discovered in the information we obtained from the laptop, which was decrypted in the United States. we could not decrypt it here, so we sent it to the United States. That they planned to blow up 11 airliners, American airliners, flying out of Asian airports and blow them up mid-air. And the Philippine Airlines flight was the test mission. And we saw among the passports, many passports that we found there, no? One passport by the name of Forlani, which is what he used to buy a ticket from Manila to Cebu, because it was from Cebu to Japan, where the bomb, that leg, where the bomb blew up, no? He must have planted it when it was en route to Cebu. It had a timer, I think 3 hours or 4 hours timer, which is why it blew up before it reached Japan. And there was a 12th plane that was supposed to have been hijacked and crashed at the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia. I held that pilot, and I personally turned over that pilot to the FBI. And it was through him that we got all the other corroborating information that we obtained from the laptop. Eventually, Ramzi Youssef, who escaped the Philippines, we missed him by a few minutes. He escaped to Pakistan. He was arrested there. And he was arrested while he was planning to kidnap our ambassador. When he was arrested, they confiscated from him a draft letter which was addressed to President Ramos, threatening to attack any Philippine installation around the world if the Philippine National Police did not release the guy that I was holding, by the name of Abdul Hakim Murad, his accomplice, who was tasked to crash that plane at the CIA headquarters. So he was arrested, and Hakim Murad was remanded to the United States. I personally brought him inside the plane in the dead of night, Holy Thursday. And I was asked, why Holy Thursday, why dead of night? I said, no media. Because we didn't have any, at that time, we didn't have any extradition treaty. Okay. Now, after that, after the release of Charles Walton from Janjalani, after this experience with Abu Sayyaf, etc., with Al-Qaeda, John Negroponte, who was then the ambassador, approached me and said, Raf, I think it's about time that we bring up to President Ramos the need for the Philippines and the United States to sign two treaties. One is an extradition treaty, and the second is a mutual legal assistance treaty, which hopefully President Ramos and President Clinton would sign, no, in sometime in 1996. Well, that happened.
Right.
We worked on it, and that happened.
It was eventually ratified, the MLAT in particular, ratified by the Senate.
Yeah.
So we're at 95, and about that same time, weren't we already preparing for hosting the APEC, which would be done the year after?
That's correct. That's correct.
Manila and Subic?
Yes, but my focus was the MILF at that time, the
Okay.
MILF in its connection with Al-Qaeda.
All right.
And
MILF or MNLF?
MI.
MI, okay.
As you know, we were dealing with, we were talking peace to both the MILF and the MNLF.
Yes.
And we could see that things were progressing with the MNLF, but things were stalled with the MILF. We saw that they were using the lull to rearm, to reorganize, retrain, etc. And we saw the connection between Hashim Salamat and Osama bin Laden. We presented our intelligence holdings to President Ramos, and that's when he instructed me to deliver a letter to Benazir Bhutto, the the Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time, requesting for intelligence cooperation and for validation of the information that we were bringing. To make a long story short, it was validated that there was this direct connection. Al-Qaeda would send trainers to Camp Abu Bakr, while Hashim Salamat would send trainees. So there was training on both sides, no? The trainees would be brought to Islamabad in the guise of religious training, and then brought to Peshawar for military training, and then over across the border into Afghanistan for on-the-job training before coming back. And that was all confirmed. And that prompted the president to send me again to talk to other heads of state for a future summit on counterterrorism, the first that would be held in Asia. And that was held in February 1996.
There you are.
So we were able to get 19 countries together, including countries that were at loggerheads at one point, no? India and Pakistan were there.
Yes.
Israel and Egypt were there, no? And then, of course, ASEAN nations were there. So were the United States and NATO countries were there. So 19, and that was a very, very successful summit, which gave us some stature in the intelligence, in the global intelligence community. Yeah.
That also speaks of the long-range vision as well, no, of the man.
You know, Secretary Ramos is a visionary, you know. That's the reason why he envisioned Philippines 2000. And Philippines 2000 was about a modern Philippines. A Philippines governed well, Philippines with citizens working together. That's why his battle cry was unity, solidarity, and teamwork. A nation that cared, shared, and dared for each other, and a country that was that had the let's say the DNA for reform, to reform, perform, and transform. You know? People thought that was a political gimmick on his part to come up with slogans like those, like UST, care, share, dare, etc. But he was basically outlining for us a way of life, transforming ourselves as Filipinos for a better Philippines for all Filipinos, a united Philippines, one Philippines. And that's where I thought that we're dealing here with a very special person, somebody that is out of the ordinary, an extraordinary man.
I'll give you an alphabet soup this time, Secretary. And GRP, MNLF. That's an alphabet soup of peace agreements.
Yeah, I was involved in all three, behind the scenes and up front. With the GRP, SKP, RAM, YOU, we came very quickly to terms. We understood each other. After all, we have the same heart, same mindset, just different approaches. So we quickly came to terms. I recall just before the takeover of President Ramos as Commander-in-Chief, he asked me to talk to Greg Honasan. And the message I delivered to Greg was, get out of the underground, join the political mainstream if you wish. Let's stop fighting because we have a nation to build. We have a nation that we have to build for our children. And this was the same message he asked me to deliver to Normi Suari, to Conrado Balweg, and to members of the CPP-NPA that were in our custody like Commander Bilog, Quintanar, Romy Quintanar, even Saturo Campo when he was our guest in Bonifacio. I would regularly visit them and deliver this message. No? The only ones that I could not deliver directly to the top leadership was the MILF because of weather. Only because of weather, but we were able to deliver the message through the executive committee. Well, in our experience, it was very difficult to come to terms with CPP, NPA, and DF because the leadership was abroad, and we could already see a disconnect between the top leadership and the local leaders here. There's I wasn't comfortable that we would come to an agreement because the ideologues that we were dealing with, mainly that of Joma Sison, wanted power sharing, and they still do up to this very day, which was not unacceptable. No? In the case of the MNLF, we had better chances because Muammar Gaddafi was helping along behind the scenes, no? And the Indonesians who served as our brokers, peace brokers, were doing a very good job in making things work.
Bringing the two panels together. Actually.
That's correct. That's
There were a number of meets actually in Jakarta, weren't there?
Yes, with General Yan leading our delegation.
Correct.
The other one where I felt we were not going to get anywhere was with the MILF because of the connections that we saw. No? They had no intention of doing so, and that we knew that if the MNLF would sign the peace agreement, they wouldn't sign, and for the simple reason that they don't trust the MNLF, and that they had their own agenda, which was an Islamist agenda. No? So at the end, what did we get? We got 2 out of 4, 50% batting average. We got the RAM SKP YOU to sign up and the MNLF. Pending to this day are the MILF and the CPP and PNDF.
That's not bad at all, Secretary.
Well, one thing, Toby, sincerity really is everything. Sincerity is everything. In 2000, the reason why Nur Miswari rebelled after signing the 1996 peace agreement was because the Philippine government did not deliver on its obligations. It's just, both sides have to endeavor to deliver on their obligations, no? And that's where sincerity comes in. Pag walang sincerity, wala, no trust, no integrity, and everything falls apart.
And to a certain extent, that's what also kind of set back, those two other groups, Well, principally the MILF and then CPP.
Well, the other thing about the MILF, just like the CPP, is that they're fragmented.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did he feel bad about that? I mean, he identified the 4 groups, FBR, as chief executive, identified those groups. These are the, at least the principal headaches we have insofar as this aspect of our national life is involved. Did he feel bad that it was just, 2 out of 4?
I would imagine so, because peace is so essential to our national development. And it's so embarrassing that he, as counterinsurgency expert, has not been able to solve the insurgency problem in the Philippines. I recall the longest-serving Thai Prime Minister, Prem Tisulanon, who had the same career path as President Ramos, Chief of Staff, Secretary, Defense, or Defense Minister, and then Prime Minister. He was our guest, the guest of the DILG-PNP and the DND-AFP. So Secretary de Villa and I co-hosted a dinner where he spoke. And he praised President Ramos and Secretary de Villa for being his counterinsurgency mentors. And he said, when I was chief of staff, I had 60,000 armed insurgents facing me in Thailand. And at that time, before I was coached by President Ramos and Secretary de Villa, my attitude was, kill as many of the enemy as possible, kill them all. He says, but my mistake was that I didn't realize for every insurgent that fell, two would stand up in their place. So there's no end to it. He said, when I retired and was brought up, I saw things from a different vantage point. So I realized that the reason why there was an insurgency was because in all those areas where the insurgents were alive and active, government had collapsed. There was no presence. There was no government presence there. So the anger, the negligence, the neglect, this ate up the people, and of course caused the distrust. So what did I do as defense minister? I ordered the armed forces of Thailand to serve as the face of the government. So aside from being soldiers, they were also teachers, engineers, health workers, etc. And slowly we were able to, bring back the communities that were helping the insurgents. Without those communities, the insurgents could not go anywhere. So we were able to dismantle them easily. When I became prime minister, he said, I was able to order all the instrumentalities of government to bring the face of Thailand up to the borders of Thailand, such that by the time I stepped down 14 years later, the 60,000 insurgents that I faced as general were down to 600. This was in 93 when we asked him to speak. So he says, that's why I'm thanking Secretary de Villa and President Ramos for having mentored me on how to deal with the insurgency. He says, now let me ask you, how come you're still fighting your insurgency? Toby, that was in 93. Fast forward to 2018, we're still fighting the insurgency. And the reason for that is because we haven't learned that counterinsurgency calls for a whole-of-nation approach, a whole-of-government approach. And this was drilled to us by President Ramos during our time. We called our counterinsurgency program then Lambat Bitag. The first two phases is basically just 20% of the effort. This is where the armed forces and the police come in to deal with the armed insurgency. So once you neutralize the armed insurgents, the remaining two phases, which account for 80% of the effort, is about good governance and development. Right? I see the reason why the army and the police are essential to counterinsurgency is because they have to remove the threat to those who are serving the people. Okay. Once that threat is removed, then local governments and the national government have to perform. And that's the only way for them to win back hearts and minds. Right? This is up to now, up to this point, we have not learned that very basic lesson.
Could that be a legacy of FVR?
Definitely. Because the counterinsurgency campaigns that we've been waging basically has those components. They just called it a different name, like Bayanihan, etc. It's still there. But we're talking about institutional breakdown. We're talking about malgovernance, and the voters have a lot to do with this, The political parties have a lot to do with it, and basically leadership at the national and local level. We have to harness the whole of government to address this problem, and to get the civilian sectors involved in the development process. If we don't do this and work as one nation to end this problem, we'll never be able to solve it.
I'm getting towards the last part of this stretch, Secretary. Something a bit more personal. Two things. His health, medical, and maybe his temper or his character. But let me get first to health. You remember that time he was confined at the Makati Med and there was the operation for his
The carotid?
carotid.
I was in the States at the time.
All right. Were
And
you still with?
I'd left government. I was in Harvard.
All right. Oh yeah, you were.
Yeah.
You were studying there. Huh?
Yes, and I remember it was December 8, 96, something like that. After APEC.
Yes.
It was after APEC.
Yes.
I remember calling him
Oh, okay.
from there, together with
Was that before or after
Ato
the
Salud.
procedure?
After the procedure.
After the procedure.
Yeah, when we learned about it.
Yeah. Yeah. How did that get you? How did that bit of news
we
hit you?
very worried about the outcome. No, we learned that he was undergoing the procedure.
Yes.
So we prayed. We prayed that we prayed for the doctors to,
Yes.
to get it done right. No, yeah.
Is there any worry that he may not
There was that 50-50 chance.
run the full length of the term?
Well, the procedure was a very delicate procedure.
Yes, it was.
And anything could go wrong, right?
Yes.
Thank God nothing of the sort happened.
Okay. That personal bit. Did the fellow have a bad streak in him?
Well,
You remember?
yeah, well, number of times he would blow up, especially if there's a lot of pressure building up, you gotta let it out, right? And boy, the presidency is a pressure-packed job, right? It's a pressure cooker. So there were times when he blew up, but it was rare. Most of the time he was calm, contained, etc. But when he blew up, we just, say, oh, well, we just have to try harder. We just have to do better.
You remember one particular incident when that?
Well,
when
not in my case,
or
but
did he have to take off steam?
he was dressing down. I entered his office. I was called to his office. He was dressing down a couple of people.
All right.
And
Remain unnamed.
yes, I will not name them. And I was there by the side, trying to be inconspicuous, right? And then he was there, pounding the table and letting off steam. Then he looks at me and he says, "Oh yes, like what the hell are you doing here, right?" He probably forgot that he called me in. So I said something that I diffused his anger. I used a line that his predecessor used on President Marcos. There was a story that President Marcos was getting mad at General Ver. Something to the effect like, when I tell you to jump, you jump. And the reply of General Ver at the time was, "From what floor, sir?" So, so when he looked at me, he said, "Yeah, what?" So I looked at him and I said, "From what floor, sir?" And then he said, "Oh, you sound like General Ver." And that diffused it. Yeah. When those two who were being dressed down left the room and saw me outside the hall later, they said, "Hey, thank you for that remark." Took the heat off them.
Okay. Were you still involved with Lakas even after leaving government?
No,
Not anymore. Okay.
I recall that during the 1998 run-up to the nominations
Yes.
of Lakas, Lakas, NUCD, MUDP. I was batting for Rene de Villa. And unfortunately, Rene lost, just like FVR, no? To Monching Mitra, he lost to Speaker Joe de Venecia. So I said, you were two parallels, no? Two generals with the same career path, right? Losing to speakers of the House. I said, what a coincidence. So when that was done, we sought an audience with President Ramos to see if he could change his mind, in the sense that the public was still searching for a non-traditional leader to take the place of President Ramos. And I remember Vice President Estrada telling me na, kasi he would confide in me. Sabi niya, ang tinatakutan ko diyan si Rene. No? Sabi ko, well, he's the guy I'm supporting. He knew I was supporting Rene. No? Yan ang tinatakutan ko. Sabi niya, pag yan ang inanoint ni Presidente Ramos, magkakasakit ako ng ulo. Ganon. He tell me that. Well, unfortunately, the choice went to Joe. And at that point, when we could not convince President Ramos to change his mind, I decided to leave Lakas. And together, Rene de Villa and I trooped over to Comelec to form the Reforma Party. Yeah.
Okay. How did the prospect, I mean, at about that time, the strongest contender was the Vice President.
He
wasn't
certainly was. And, looking at it from an expert's point of view, I mean, it's not me as an expert, but from those who I was talking to, they said the only way to beat popularity is unity. So all of those guys, like Rene, Joe de Venecia, Raul Rocco, Lito Osmeña, you band together and just get one guy to represent all of you, one-on-one. No, then you'll have a better chance of beating Erap. But if you guys run, that's it. He'll win by a landslide. Sure enough.
Which is what happened.
Yeah.
Which is what happened. All right. Estrada is declared the winner of the 98 race. He becomes President-elect. Were you in contact with FBR at that time?
Yes.
What did you sense in him at that time? Was
Frustration.
Yeah.
He was very
Was there any
frustrated.
disappointment that, this was 6 years and, well, in fact, capping a lifetime in the public service and handing it over to Estrada?
Well, even when Vice President Estrada was in the cabinet of President Ramos, I remember President Ramos expressing his frustration because, well, if President Estrada hears this, I hope he sees it from a different light, no? This is not really hindi ito patama sa kanya, but it's basically I'm recounting the events that transpired during that period in his life and that of President Ramos. President Estrada would go to the cabinet, will attend the cabinet meetings only to get approval for funding or for fund releases, no? And once he got the approval from the president, he'd leave. He wouldn't stay on to deliberate or listen to the NEDA presentations about the economy, the new projects that had to be discussed, etc. And at some point, the president said, I'm so frustrated with ERAP. I'm trying to build him up to be my successor. In case something happens to me while I'm in office, I want him to be ready to take over as president, no? But he's not taking advantage of that opening I'm giving him. I'm so frustrated. He says, for all I could drop dead right now, and he'll have to take over. If he's not ready, what's going to happen to the country? Yeah. So he expressed that to me once. Yeah.
So clearly there was some disappointment or frustration.
Frustration. It was frustration, and then I guess what got his goat with President Estrada after President Estrada took over. And I remember President Estrada telling me that he made a mistake. This had to do with the accusation that President Ramos pocketed the money for modernization, AFP modernization. If you'll recall, Toby, I mentioned earlier that the Asian financial crisis pushed back the development of Fort Bonifacio. Since his term was almost over, what he decided to do na lang was leave behind seed capital. He couldn't wait. I mean, nobody was buying Fort Bonifacio, so he decided to just provide seed capital, I think the equivalent of 5.7 billion pesos. And during the transition meetings in Campo Aguinaldo, this was officially transmitted to the incoming team that there's 5.7 billion for AFP modernization. When President Estrada took over, for some reason, the people around him managed to convince him that the 5.7 billion was gone and that President Ramos must have pocketed the money, right? Which really got his goat, no? Because eventually, when President Ramos trooped over to the Senate, I think this was in maybe the year 2001 or 2002, when the Senate was investigating this, he presented the evidence, no, that the 5.7 billion that he left behind was withdrawn, if I recall properly, if I recall right, it was withdrawn in 3 tranches during the time that President Estrada was waging his war against the MILF.
Yes.
If you add up the 3 tranches, it amounted to 5.7 billion. So it couldn't have been. And who helped him dig up the records and I think went with him to the Senate? I think it was Undersecretary Emmy Bongkodin, yeah, who was still, I think, with DBM at the time. Yeah.
That was a sour note there.
So that was a sour note, and I think that led to the animosity between him and President Estrada.
Yeah.
I recall after President Estrada was released from resort arrest, he invited me to his house for lunch.
Okay.
And it was during that lunch, where he said, I wish I could talk to President Ramos and apologize to him for that mistake. Yeah.
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 What could be the greatest legacy of the man?
Wow. He is a true son of the Republic. He doesn't stop working for the country, even at his late age. Reformer, patriot, nation builder, leader. A fellow that led by example. His work ethic was one. And you know, despite all of the things that thrown at him, he's a man is with very deep Christian values. I remember one of the first executive orders that he passed early on was the moral recovery program. And it was based on the analysis or assessment that the reason why so many things were going wrong in the country was because we lost our moral moorings. A lot of our problems were unethical, issues of ethics. We were a nation that could no longer tell the difference between right or wrong. Or even if we could tell the difference between right and wrong, we would choose wrong over right. And so early on, he recognized that. Thanks to Senator Letty Shahani, she was the strongest advocate for that, and President Ramos understood it because his family was a God-fearing family, God-fearing Christian family, and they practiced their faith. Social reform, uplifting people out of poverty, public service. That's all about Christian values. What did Jesus Christ say? Only one commandment, aside from love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I guess it was his love for the Filipino people that he served the nation well as president.
Thank you very much.